thank you guys for having us here. First, how many of you guys like to make data-driven decisions? Raise the hand. Everybody, right? Well, when you hear analytics, how many of you guys actually cringe and then run away? So the major thing that we do at Amplitude is we help product managers, growth teams, really understand user behavior without having to write any programming or SQL. So you guys can really go in and get in-depth analysis. So we have a retention playbook that we wrote with Nir Ayal that if you give me your business card later, I can actually send you a digital copy because you probably don't want to carry that around. It's about 170 pages, but it's really good stuff. And on top of that, we have some books by SC who actually started this. So if you guys want to take a look at that, I'll be in the back. Don't be afraid. If you have any questions, feel free to chat.
Thanks, Alex. And we have Adam from mParticle. Every time people saw mParticle, they're like, what does mParticle do? Well, now you'll know.
Thank you, Thank you for having us. Adam Blake, I'm Sales Director at mParticle. Proud sponsor, of course, of Products That Count. We really like the work you guys do here, so thank you. Who's heard of mParticle here? Okay, great. I know you have. I'm not as funny as him. Sorry, guys. So, what is mParticle? mParticle, in short, is a customer data platform, or what we call a CDP. What we allow you to do essentially is integrate data from all your digital properties and orchestrate that across your entire marketing stack. So, if you guys want to learn more about what that means and what exactly we do, come talk to me after. And if GDPR is scaring you, definitely talk to me after. Okay? Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, Adam. And normally I know we have a bunch of folks from eBay. Can you raise your hands if you're from eBay? Yep, there we go, and some product folks, thank you. And normally we have Kamal or someone from the team that actually brought us in and helped make the sponsorship possible, but on their behalf, again, thank you. And we should have dots, so anyone who has a red dot on their badge is hiring, anyone who is green is open, so hopefully we have more networking later, and that'll help. All right, so on to today's event. So we have Shaun, and Shaun has a great history, and I'm really interested in his talk. Thanks for coming out here, Shaun. And the talk is 25 minutes, so relatively quick. So hold your questions, because then we have 25 minutes for Q&A after, and we'll finish around 8:15, and we have still about 45 minutes. If you're still hungry or need another drink after the talk, we still have the space till 9 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, we do need to vacate the space, so we can continue the conversations outside if we need to, but I would ask for your help in helping keep the space clean and vacating the space at 9 o'clock. So, Shaun, with that, go over to you. You don't need that.
Don't know? I don't think I have any other mic.
All right.
No.
You can have this then. Maybe that one's just for the...
Fantastic. Okay, awesome. Thank you, everybody. So I'm Shaun. I'm presently the head of product at Metromile. Does anyone know Metromile? Anyone our customer? Oh, come on. Okay. That's disappointing. Anyway, so Metromile makes paper mile car insurance, but actually I'm not really going to talk at all about Metromile, unless anybody asks some questions about how I map it in. I'm actually going to talk about my time at Atlassian, where I built out the growth team over my many years there. So for some context, who the hell am I? I am Shaun. I ran growth at Atlassian for 5 years. I built it from zero, so I built the growth function entirely at Atlassian. But I started at Atlassian actually running product for Greenhopper, which became Jira Agile, which became Jira Software, which is now the largest product in the Atlassian portfolio. Tell me, does anyone know what Jira is? Anyone in the room know Jira? How about Confluence, HipChat? Anybody? Okay, so a few people seem to know Atlassian. Maybe some of you don't, so hopefully I can introduce you into what we do. But fundamentally, Atlassian, I think it's currently valued at $12 billion, but it's got a $1 billion run rate going out of mid-2018. So it's a very big software company that makes software for collaboration, helps people collaborate. And I want to talk to you about some of the lessons I learned over my 6 years there. And I felt like, if all this is like me just talking about a bunch of product strategy, that's going to be super boring. So instead, I thought I'd try and weave in a little bit of my story and how I've learnt the hard way about what does and doesn't work in certain types of businesses. And so in order to do that, I'm going to weave in my story, so forgive me. I'm going to talk about where I joined Atlassian from. It's this company based out of Sydney, Australia called Integrated Research. Have any of you guys heard of Integrated Research? I knew that would happen. I thought it would be absolutely zero, right? So to give you a bit of an idea, integrated research makes monitoring systems for very business critical systems. So this is the type of stuff that stock exchanges or banks or telcos use to make certain that you can make payments and you can make phone calls and you can make trades, right? So really like high-end sort of systems and high-end monitoring systems. And it's based out of Sydney, Australia. It's about $44 million a year in 2011, which is the year I joined Atlassian, so I'm kind of telling my story forward. It was about $44 million a year, growing at about 37%, so it's an okay startup. Like, I mean, it's not killing it, but certainly not, not zero. And we were selling, as I mentioned, to these very big, very, high-value systems. And when I think about what was fundamentally going on there, if I try and map our market to our strategy, then realistically, what we were looking at was a market where there aren't that many very high-value systems in the world, in terms of systems that if they go down, you lose tens or thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars every minute, right? And what integrated research recognized was that those systems did exist, and because those systems existed, the value of monitoring them and making certain that they didn't go down is massive. Now, a flip side of that is that because there aren't so many of them, it's a very small market. And so you can debate for yourself, well, is this market attractive? It's small, but it's extremely high value. But there are strategic reasons why you might go after it, actually. Because one of the side effects of being small is that the market is very targetable, right? So you can identify, there aren't that many stock exchanges, there aren't that many telcos in the world. Like, you can literally find them by name and you can go and meet with them. So that's actually kind of cool, right? And the fact that they're high value means that you can go whale hunting, right? You can build small pieces of software that service their needs and go in there and just harpoon the whale, right? And reel it in. And so fundamentally, that's kind of what integrated research set out to do, and it was pretty successful at doing it. But the flip side of that type of market is that while the market is small, it's very geographically dispersed. As I mentioned, there aren't that many of these systems, and that's because mostly countries can only sustain a certain number of stock exchanges, a certain number of banks, a certain number of telcos. And so that means that if you're going to service this market, you have this very difficult problem of how do I service like every country in the world? How do I service a few customers in every single country in the world? And while all of these customers are extremely high value, they're kind of massive, and they're kind of used to getting their own way. They have very specific environments, and they expect you to, come to them and to make your systems work exactly the way they want them to. It's still a targetable market, and actually it's still an extremely profitable market. But in order to access that market, people talk a lot about product market fit, but I don't think they talk enough about company market fit, right? Realistically, if I want to go and target this market, it's a valuable market, then I need to have a company that can do that. And so if I want to target the world, if I want to target a few big customers all around the world, I'm going to need sales offices all around the world. So integrated research, this $44 million company, had offices in the United States, offices in Europe, offices in Australia servicing all of APAC, offices in Singapore, right? So even if it's a small company, it has these supply lines. And then it had this enormous pre-sales org, well, enormous, a large pre-sales org designed to service that market and the needs. And so what that net means is that in order to take that product to market, you need to spend a lot of your money, as in about 50% of your incoming revenue goes straight back out the door in sales and marketing. Right? And that leaves you about 20% that you can spend in building product, which is okay, and it works pretty well. And there are a lot of companies that execute this model, and some of the most famous would probably be Oracle, SAP, SuccessFactors, which was acquired by SAP. Like, there are many, many of them that offer this high-value enterprise product that an army of salespeople, implementation, and everything else. And there are some other kind of more sexy companies today that also operate this model. So, for example, ServiceNow is one example, but there are many, many others. So that was where I came from, and I tell you that story because it was a bit of a weird moment when I decided that I was going to consider joining this weird company called Atlassian, because the models couldn't be more different, the companies could not be more different, the way they approach the world could not be more different. And I'm not even sure why I even entertained the idea of interviewing at Atlassian, because I knew before I even interviewed that they were offering their most important products, all of them. This is from 2011, the Atlassian sign-up page from 2011, and I knew that they were offering all of their products for $10 for 10 users forever. Install it on your PC, use it forever, $10 for 10 users forever, right? This is not intro pricing. And then, get this, they were taking that $10 and donating it to charity. So they actually got none of those dollars, right, coming in the front door. It just seemed like wild, absolutely wild. And so I thought to myself, okay, I think I get this. I think outside, I thought to myself, I think I get the model. This is intro pricing. And what they're going to do is they're going to get people in real cheap, right? And then just sell, really get them on the razor blades. It's like the razor blade model, you know? The razors themselves are cheap, but the blades, they're really going to screw you. And so I thought, okay, well, the price must really jack up as we move up the adoption curve. And that actually turns out not to be true. So this, again, is Atlassian's page from 2011, and you can see that the pricing for Jira at its largest tier topped out at $24,000 for an unlimited number of users for a perpetual license, right? So you just go to yourself, how does this company from Sydney, Australia, execute a model where they're basically giving this software away, it tops out at a very small number, how the hell do you make that model work, right? And so I want to describe a little bit about that. So I joined Atlassian, and this was the big question of my mind, right? How could Atlassian grow? How was Atlassian going to make a bunch of money? What did the future look like for Atlassian? And you know, the very first lesson I kind of got drilled into me by everybody at Atlassian, Mike and Scott included, the CEOs of Mike and Scott, is the idea that Atlassian is fundamentally, pivotally based around the idea of land and expand. The model is land and then expand. And what that means is we will do anything necessary in order to land in a team somewhere inside some business that we can benefit, right? There is some team somewhere inside some massive organization that really needs an issue tracker, or really needs documentation space, or really needs a source code tracker or something like that. And the idea is that what we want to do is find that team somehow and get into them. We want to make them successful. And because we make collaboration software, and all software kind of spews off assets, using it spews off this other kind of data that other teams use, or emails that other teams are integrated with, or processes that other teams end up touching. And so if you make one team successful, then naturally other teams will hear about it, they will interact with it, they will decide, oh, this thing's pretty cool, they will use it, and before you know it, you're spreading from team to team inside an organization. And the cool bit is that even eventually, even if you start in, for example, software development in the engineering org, eventually the project management org is going to go, this is a really cool idea. Eventually marketing will go, I would love a way to plan my work too. And so eventually you'll actually get all the way across the entire business. And if you extend it further, you actually end up jumping from business to business to business, right? All through this whole land and expand methodology. Now, it's very easy to say that. It's actually very hard to do it. And the reason it's very hard to do it is because you can think that in the end, your revenue is roughly going to be equal to the number of customers you have times, you could say the average revenue per customer, but I tend to think of it as the footprint in each of those customers. So the value you are offering each of those customers times the number you have. And the problem is that, you know, as a startup, you preferably would like your revenue to beat your costs. Because if you don't, you're losing money hand over fist, and how long can you do that for? And so land and expand is a very difficult model to boot because of this dynamic. And so what tends to happen is that people begin down this road, and then they go, okay, now I need to either get a large number of customers or great surface area inside those customers. There are two ways I can do that. I can send a sales force out, and I can get them deep into the customer, right? So I can drive the software deep to maximize my footprint inside a business, or I can spend a bunch of money on marketing, right, in order to touch the maximum number of customers. So I can go wide, or I can go deep, or I can do both. But both of those things are going to be an expensive go-to-market strategy that I have to execute, right? Now put yourself, today a bunch of businesses execute those models, right? Typically the way they do it is they build out a really great piece of software, and at times they take investment money, sometimes VC money or outside money. They use it to fund a sales force and then execute that model, right? Now, if you put yourself in the shoes of Mike and Scott when they started Atlassian in 2011, that option was not even on the table, right? So they started in 2001, I apologize, 2001. They started it just out of university. 2001 was just after the tech wreck. You guys may remember some of that, right? There was no money on the table for anybody, right? And so these guys just out of university were like, well, okay, we don't want to work for anybody else. There aren't really any great jobs on the table anyway. So what are we going to do? So they thought, I know, we'll use our credit card debt in order to start a company, right? And so they started this company, and their idea was to offer remote support for J2EE applications from Sydney, Australia to customers around the world, right? It's a very unscalable sort of business to be offering. Look at people laughing. Anyway, so they started this business, and the real goal was to basically find a good idea. So they started with the support thing, but they wanted to find a good idea and eventually build a product. And it turns out that actually, like, they were in exactly the right place at the right time, because they recognized that here they were having to record the needs of all the people who were calling for support. They realized there was no good system to do that. They realized they needed one. They were software developers, so they did what they always do. They built one, and it was called Jira. And they suddenly realized, wait a second, this thing that we've just built is actually really valuable, right? Like, other people really need this thing. And so they're like, okay, well, now we have, our credit card debt. We have this product that's got value. We're sitting in Sydney, Australia. What are we going to do from here? And I'm sure you can all recognize that does not sound like an easy thing to go execute. And so what I love about this is this slide is literally from Mike Cannon-Brookes, one of the two founders of Atlassian's presentation in 2005. So this is, roughly 4 to 5 years in the Atlassian journey. This is one of his slides that I've kindly borrowed. And not only does it represent the Atlassian model at that time, it resonates to me as a person who was there for 6 years, because this was always the DNA of Atlassian, right? So effectively, they have this piece of software called Jira. They're like, we have no dollars for a sales team, but we want to sell it. So we need this thing to sell itself. So how do we do that? Well, there are a bunch of different ways we can do that, but one way we can do it is make it really cheap, right? That'll certainly make it easier to sell a bunch of it. It won't make it trivial, but it'll make it easier. And then they're like, okay, well, if it's going to be really low priced, then we need thousands of customers, because otherwise we're not going to make any money, which is fine. Then they went, okay, well, in order to sell thousands of customers, it's not going to work doing it from Sydney, just in Australia. We're going to have to do it all over the world, right? And then they went, okay, well, that means that effectively we need to make software with a model that means that people take it out of our hands rather than us giving it to them, right? I mean, simple, right? Like, if you can execute this model, you've just totally nailed it. And so I love this slide because it does literally represent the way Atlassian thinks about the world, but man, is that a hard model to execute. Basically what you've said is you're going to have this low-cost product that's really amazing, and it's going to sell itself around the world. And how do you do that? And so I think the other side of the coin to me was word of mouth, right? And like, I cannot describe how much I love the power of word of mouth. Like, I don't think of word of mouth as referral programs. I don't think of word of mouth as incentivized referral. I think of word of mouth as the literally most authentic, most scalable way you will ever have of acquiring customers, right? It is the bomb, right? And the reason it's the bomb is because when you get somebody to love your product so much that they turn to someone else and tell that person about that product, you are getting the best recommendation you could ever get. That person will go and try it. If they too are successful, they will tell other people, and basically this virtuous cycle. Now, when you think about like your general marketing funnel, for example, the value stops as soon as the dollars stop. Right? So if I'm running a campaign in Google AdWords or whatever, I can bring in a bunch of attention, but as soon as I stop the dollars going in, it's dead, right? Word of mouth is not like that. So word of mouth is extremely hard to execute, but it is really unbelievable. And today, 80% of all of Atlassian's incoming sales still comes from word of mouth. Right? So we're talking about a company with $1 billion run rate where 80% of all incoming sales cannot be attributed to any paid acquisition, sales, any other way of being acquired, right? Really amazing stuff. So how do you do this? How do you get supercharged word of mouth? So we thought a lot about this, and we thought outside in rather than inside out. And so the first thing you have to think about is, as a user, why would I recommend this to everybody else? And if there is no good reason for me to recommend it, then I'm dead in the water. And the answer is that you really need an unbelievably great product. Like, you totally want to smoke the competition. You have to be really good, right? The second thing is, how do I convince someone else to try it? And in order to do that, you have to make it low friction for them to even be able to try it. And so that means you need to be open with your pricing. You need to have a really easy trial, and you actually need to make it inexpensive, because the goal is not to get other people to try it, it's to get them to try it, to like it, to keep it, and then expand it further in their organizations, right? So you can't just have a trial for $10 and then charge people $10,000. It has to be scalable. There has to be some way it can scale. And finally, but actually very importantly, you need some network in which you believe this could expand, right? Because for word of mouth to work, there has to be some group, there has to be some other person I would tell about it, right? Now, luckily, in the collaboration space, that's pretty easy because like all businesses are fundamentally communities of interest. So the R&D org inside a business is a community of interest. So if one of them succeeds with Jira, then others will tell each other, and then the overall business is a community of interest, so it will expand from department to department. But actually, there are also lots of communities of interest outside the building. So some that Jira used early on were the J2EE community. At that time, that was brand new, so they kind of connected themselves to that. Stack Overflow, other sorts of development communities that existed at the time. People would naturally spread when they were posting and someone said, we have trouble with X, somebody would say, Jira's amazing, you could try it, it's really cheap. So I see actually a bunch of businesses attempt this model a little bit, but eventually you reach a certain point when it becomes hard. And what I mean by that is that if you are going to land and expand, then as you expand, you will progressively become more important to the organization. And that will happen in two ways. One is that your software will become pivotal, so people will start doing really important work in it, and it will become clear to the executives that that's true. And the total invoice amount will go from being on a credit card, on somebody's expense report, that gets just approved because it's $10, to being like thousands or tens of thousands, right? So eventually you will come up above the point where you are so important to the organization that now they want to talk to you, right? They want to talk about contracts. They want to talk about pricing. They want to talk about compliance. They want to get you to fill in their compliance checklist, right? Eventually you will attract that attention. And what I notice happen a lot actually in the startup community is that you reach this inflection point and you go, how am I going to address that market? And you kind of think to yourself, well, okay, I need to adapt myself in order to go and be able to do those things. And I was used to this because at Integrated Research, I had literally executed the enterprise sales playbook for like years, right? And the enterprise sales playbook is that once you reach this moment, now is the point when you shut down your pricing. So you hide all of your pricing other than the intro pricing, because now you can send in a sales force. The sales force can negotiate the pricing for you. They can extract the maximum value from the customer, and you send in customer success in order to integrate the product, customize it to make certain it's really sticky. So basically, it's almost like you view the world as you've reached escape velocity. Now's the time to cash in. Like now's the time to really draw down on that. And the way to do that is by sending out a sales force and integration force and everything else. And my life at Atlassian was kind of funny because I arrived in 2011 and I thought to myself, I interviewed with Mike Cannon-Brookes and I said, so when are you going to get a sales force? And he said, probably never. Right? And I said, sure, right? And I thought to myself, no problem, a year from now. I remember a year later, and I'm like, we're having some of these challenges, right? Contracts and everything else. And I'm thinking to myself, any moment now, Salesforce. And it just never happened. 6 years went by, and it never happened. And the answer is that Atlassian never abandoned the fact that, their approach to the world was going to be to make the very best software, to sell it for the lowest price, which meant they needed thousands of customers, many thousands of customers, which meant that they had to use a land and expand model. And if you want to do those things, then the only available option to you is to do low touch and automation, right? You simply can't do a high touch model for this. And they just never felt like the compromise of changing models was ever going to be worth it for the business. And so here I was thinking, okay, now's the moment to introduce a Salesforce. But actually, it turns out that for a lot of Atlassian's history, we leaned very hard into the idea that we didn't have to do everything ourselves. And so the way I think about this is that companies that are really, really good at product innovation, that are good at worldwide scale, but that can still be the price leaders, are low-touch companies, and they are not the same companies as the types of companies that can do contracts, that can do customization, that can do local presence, that can do high-touch. There is room in a marketplace for both of them, right? It's just not the same company. And so what Atlassian lent into really hard, again, from very early on in the company, was the idea that you needed a channel, an effective channel, we called them partners or a marketplace, in order to be able to do the things that you could not do, that were not your strengths. And so some of these partners, have been with Atlassian for like 10 years. Service Rocket, for example, 10 years, right? And these companies grew from these little 3-4 person consulting shops up to massive organizations. Service Rocket does over 10 million in revenue a year. Adaptivist, these are massive businesses now, and there are hundreds of them, right? And they exist inside the Atlassian ecosystem, offering the things that Atlassian is not really great at. And I don't want to say that lots of companies don't do that. Like Integrated Research, for example, did also have partners and a channel. But what I have noticed happen, again, very, very regularly when you have a channel is this strange co-opetition with your channel. So at Integrated Research, what we had happen was we would have this channel. The channel would be bringing in all these deals. If those deals were, reasonably small, then we were all good with that, right? As the deals got bigger and bigger, the customers got bigger and bigger, then suddenly we would want to get involved because we could see there was so much money on the table, right? Or the customer was asking us to get involved, right? But once you do that once, you're doing it everywhere. And all of a sudden, your channel is like now not sure what you're going to take, what you're going to keep, right? They can't operate their own independent businesses. They're not sure how you're going to behave, right? And so you don't get this true like benefit that you would expect to get from a channel. And so Atlassian just never did that. And so, for example, the marketplace, which you can think of as like the App Store, but for Atlassian products, made over $100 million last year. Just the marketplace, right? It was $100 million by itself. So these are plugins being sold by these companies. For Atlassian products, right? So when you leave the money on the table, you allow a really great ecosystem to build up, and when it does, you get what you hope for, right? You get the ability to address this market. And we debated this internally over and over again, right? And I wanted to give you like a specific internal example because I think it illustrates the way we thought about the world. We ran an experiment where you guys have probably seen this thing many, many times before. We ran an experiment where we put like an intercom-like prompt inside the UI on the second last day of the evaluation, asking people, is there anything we could do to help? Right? Is there anything we could do to make you more successful? Lots of products do this, right? And would it surprise you to know that it actually significantly increased the purchase rate? Substantially, double-digit percentages increased the purchase rate. Now, would your natural response be to go like, this is a slam dunk, we implement this tomorrow? It would kind of be my natural response, right? But actually inside Atlassian, that's not exactly the conversation that happened at all. It was the opposite of that. It was like, okay, we could implement this thing tomorrow and we would have a 10% lift in our conversion rate of this software, right? But if that were true, then we would still have these humans answering these questions about our broken software forever. Right? Presumably the fact they need help indicates that there's a problem with our software that we're not fixing, right? So we'll literally eventually we'll build out an army of people answering questions we should have just fixed long ago, right? And so the only way we were ever going to implement this internally was if we implemented this and we staffed up this team, we wanted to have a matching development team who held back a percentage of the population that did not see this, and it was their job to obliterate this dialogue. It was their job to blow this thing away, because in the end, that will never scale. And actually, what's even worse is that you'll have these people hearing all this really great feedback from the customer, and they'll have no good way to drive it into a product roadmap. Like it just feels like you're bolting on, a salve for a real problem. So we pushed back pretty hard on this type of thing, even when it won. And the net of really this focus is that what you ended up with is like, pretty much a cheater, right? Like what Atlassian is really good at is delivering the best products in the world at a very low price, right? And the way you get so good at that is by basically being able to take all of your incoming dollars and putting as many of them as you can back into R&D because your product just becomes unbelievably great. And so you can see that, compare this to integrated research, this is literally the inverse of that, right? So you spend 16% of your revenue on sales and marketing, and you spend 37% of your investment in product, right? And so your product just gets better and better, runaway better. And so the way I think about that is twofold. The first thing is that you end up with a great product at a low price, right? That allows you to land. Your great ecosystem allows you to expand even in places where you otherwise could not expand because they require really high touch. And that allows you to address all the market, right? Normally you would only be able to address some of it, right? But now you can address all of the market. But the second best bit about that is you suck all of the air out of the market for your competitors. So how do you compete? Let's say, for example, you want to join this market. How do you compete with a company that's delivering the best product at the lowest price? If you go in hard with sales, then you're still going to have to compete with a price anchor. If you go in with the best product, how do you catch up with a product that's investing, almost 50% of all revenue into R&D, right? It's a very, very difficult market. It sucks all of the competitive pressures out of the market. So briefly to talk about growth, as I mentioned, I started the growth group at Atlassian. We started at about 5 people with this ragtag group out there, and we grew to about 50 people. We had voice of the customer, analytics, engineering, you name it. We were like a substantial kind of part of the product organization. Never growth hacking. It was never growth acquisition tactics. It was never guerrilla marketing. It was never acquisition channels. It was never about that, right? It was the fundamental realization that software is scalable only to the degree that you can attract happy users, because those happy users will give you more happy users, right? It's that simple. So how do you get happy users? And the answer is you get happy users by giving them functionality, but you also give them happy users by making them successful. Right? And the only way they are successful is by finding your feature, by using your feature, by actualizing their needs out of your feature, right? Shipping features is not enough, because software ends up full of friction. And so we were basically a team tasked with searching, finding, and destroying all of that friction. And so I wanted to give you just a couple of examples, and you'll need to forgive me. Some of them are going to seem like super old school, but remember, this was a 5-year period, and these are some of the ones I just think are the most interesting. So this is back in 2012. This was the install process of the behind the firewall version of Jira. And so you can see that it asks you for really amazing stuff, like, do you want to use your own database or some built-in database? Do you want to configure your base URL, whatever that is, right? Like, it asks you all of these interesting questions about, like, as a developer, how might I want to configure this piece of software, right? What it doesn't ask you is whether or not you might actually want to use one of the Atlassian add-ons, which at the time were Greenhopper and Service Desk. Would it surprise you to know that the vast majority of Jira installations used one of those things, right? So what I got when I finished this process, this very painful process, was a Jira that didn't have the thing I probably was looking for, right? And it's funny because, like, you know, we shipped this not because we want to ship bad software. We shipped it because it's so hard to see what the customer sees, right? And so we stepped back, we went, oh, that's really weird. We're not doing that. We should add this dialogue. So we added this one screen, right? And this one screen says, do you just want to use Jira? Would you like Jira Agile? Or would you like Jira Service Desk as well? And it would automatically download and install that thing for you, right? It probably took us about a week to develop, a week to ship as an experiment. And, like, it drove up the purchase rate of all of those things by double-digit percentages, right? Like, unbelievable sort of outcome, purely from a friction perspective. But let me give you another one. Again, I'm choosing these examples because they are examples of outside-in thinking rather than inside-out thinking, and how simple that can be when you find it. Who's used Confluence? Has anyone used Confluence? Awesome. Okay, cool. So you guys know what I'm talking about here, right? When you start a Confluence, the goal of a Confluence is to build a bunch of pages and collaborate on those pages. But pages are in spaces. And when you start a Confluence, you literally get just an empty system. There are no pages, there are no spaces, there's nothing, right? This is also years ago as well, right? And what we thought to ourselves was, like, I wonder if one of the problems is that when people arrive in this empty thing, they don't know what a space is, they don't know what they'd use one for, they don't know at all how they would make this thing work, right? And so we literally built this dialogue, and the next dialogue, so basically it says, you might want to use spaces for teams, departments, or projects, right? Pick one of those things, and then press next, and on the next page it asks you for a list of those things you might want to create, and that was it. That was the end of this process, right? It was 2 screens, again, probably 200 lines of code. Who knows how big it was, but very small, right? And this, again, by itself, substantially, as in double-digit percentages, drove up the number of people that succeeded and purchased Confluence, right? And it turns out that software is full. There are hundreds and hundreds of these moments of any software that you build where people die, right? They cease using your product because they go, I don't understand what the hell you're talking about, right? And so it strikes me, my view, is that in software, we have developed this incredible survivor bias, this accidental but incredible survivor bias. All we do is go and interview users. All we do is go and interview people or look at analytics of people who have survived. All we do is look at literally the very tail end of all the people who survived into the exact moment we're looking at, right? And so if I could give you one thing, it would be that 99% of people who've ever touched your software probably hate you, right? I'm sorry, but it's true. And it's okay. It's okay to believe that and to internalize that, because the goal is to find them and fix all of those problems. Because 99% of people who've touched your software have failed to succeed with it, right? 99% of people, they failed at step 1, or they failed at step 2, or step 3, or step 4. Wherever they failed, it doesn't matter. They're still dead, right? And it's our job to find it and fix it. So we have to both ship really great software, but also remove all the friction in order to massively goose our growth. So if I step back, what is the Atlassian model? It's quite simple. It's that Atlassian wants to deliver the very best software at the lowest price. What that will do is that will drive word of mouth. Word of mouth will drive massive scale. Scale is enabled by automation, self-service, and ecosystem, right? So you can access the higher ends. And the real magic of this is having the conviction and the focus to pull it off, right? To literally not be swayed, right? To tackle this model and to do it the whole way through, right? And to work out ways around challenges you face that don't water down the model. So I won't briefly talk about these, but the Atlassian values really allow you to scale a business, because remember that I was at Atlassian from about 260 people to 2,600 people. You're 10 times as big. How do you keep this scrappy attitude? And the answer is, we need to really lean into values, and Atlassian values are not things that are printed on the wall. Pretty much everybody in the building could quote these to you, and they would. In a meeting, they would tell you that violates this value, right? They lived them. And we did things like ship it in order to so ship it was basically for 24 hours every quarter, everybody would drop tools and do whatever they wanted to do. They would do something that would make the company better. So think of it as a hackathon, but like the whole company, just downs tools. So people would improve processes or fix software or change internal systems. They would do whatever they had to do in order to make the world slightly better than it was the day before, 24 hours earlier. The net is you end up with a really great company that listed on the NASDAQ. This is the IPO picture, and I wanted to show it to you because something that's really important to me about this image is that if you look across all of these people standing on this stage, it may surprise you, but there are hardly any executives there. There are hardly any board members there, right? Mostly the executives didn't go. Mostly the board members did not go. What you were seeing is mostly the people that were at Atlassian for 10 years or longer, right? These were the bedrock of the company. These were the people who lived and breathed the values, right? And that was what Atlassian was about. Not about the most recently in, senior executives and leaders, right? Very authentic growth. So a couple of takeaway points. I know I'm way over time, so a couple of takeaway points. Software, it has zero marginal cost, right? A line of code once written is free to execute for an unlimited number of times, right? So software is by its nature highly scalable, right? It's infinitely scalable, right? When you add humans to the loop, you are taking that away, right? Because human costs always scale with your market. Scale is defensible and it's very lucrative, but in order to truly achieve scale, you need to leave money on the table. And so if you find yourself at moments where you're like, wow, I could really goose this, I could make a lot more money, right? That might be the moment to not do that. Right, that might be the moment to leave the money on the table, to allow an ecosystem and other partners to grow up around you. And what you get when you do this is you get this type of thing. This is land and expand. This is from earlier Atlassian documentation, and you can see basically the rate at which different cohorts start. Some of them do churn, but then they just grow, and they just grow and they grow, and you get this hockey stick, right? Not enabled by the most recently in, enabled by all of them. Every single cohort growing across the years. So yeah, that's it. Any questions?
So we have a few minutes for. It's working? All right. We have a few minutes for questions. All right. Shaun, you got it.
Sure.
I came tonight because I have an enterprise software company and we're doing it without sales.
Awesome.
So spot on. One of the questions I have, I don't know enough about Jira or Atlassian software to know this answer. If you're making software that allows people to do things that they don't already do, or don't already think can be done, how does that affect this kind of model? I don't know the degree to which Atlassian was making something they were already doing more efficient as opposed to, is it possible this model, and you're out teaching people to do something they don't know how to do?
Yeah, so the question is basically, does this model work when it's not so much a substitute? You're substituting for an existing process. Does it work for a new process that's really transformative? So the answer is it's probably in my mind, it's probably slightly harder to start because the individuals need to be convinced that there's any value here at all. But it's easier to sustain. Because realistically, when somebody says to another person, okay, you should try this Jira thing because the way you are presently tracking issues is not good, right? You basically have to get them up and over the hump of the fact that they already have a way, right? Whatever that substitute is. And when Jira first came about, there were a bunch of substitutes. There were things like Track, Redmine, a bunch of other substitutes, Bugzilla, right? And so it wasn't as though we didn't face that. And so that did lead to a bunch of friction. But I guess I would argue that if you can knock it out of the park, right? I think a lot about product experiences, and I think that realistically what you're trying to do is get people up and over the friction of trying something new to a point when they actualize and have this moment where they go, oh my God, I had no idea this thing ever existed. Why am I not doing it this way? How did I not do that, right? And so I feel like when you get people to that moment, that's the word of mouth moment, right? For Uber, it's the moment when you get out and you walk away from the vehicle, right? We all know that moment, right? And so many products have those great moments. So I agree that it may be hard for you to get people to those moments, but when you get people to those moments, those people are the people who will just tell everybody. So, yeah.
All right, we'll do one here, Ginger.
Thanks for the inspiring talk. I'm curious, how did your founder come up with this intuition that like living money is not easy, I'm sure, right? Was it a very analytical decision, like you actually calculated the loss and the pros and cons, or was it just intuition? Like, what inspired him to come up with this idea of never building a sales force?
Yeah, so the question is what enabled the founders to realize that even though they were leaving money on the table, that was the better option. I think, sometimes a company is a product of its DNA as well as its analytical capabilities, and so I think the end result is that both Mike and Scott, and in fact the whole business, believed in the idea that software was fundamentally about the ability to do things without needing to have people get on phones, without needing to have people go to meeting rooms, without needing to have all these manual human processes. And Jira's fundamental goal was to remove some of those really painful human processes. And so I think for them it always felt analogous. It always felt like, okay, well, you're saying my software exists to remove all these manual processes and try and enable collaboration seamlessly, but now I'm going to add more people that do the opposite of that, right? And so was it easy necessarily to debate those things? I can't tell you what exactly went on inside Mike and Scott's mind, but they never once wavered from it. Never once. Like, it was funny. Like, I quite literally had conversations with Mike about it, and he would just look at me like I was a weirdo. It just never resonated with him at all. I'm like, if we had sales, we could make a bunch more money. I feel like we could probably double revenue, right? Like in 1 year, like I really feel like we could just absolutely crush this. And it was just never anything that they wanted to entertain. They're like, we're going to do this the hard way, right? We're going to do it the right way. We're going to do it by growing organically inside all these businesses, right?
Hello. So, I'm politely skeptical, hopefully politely. And it seems to me that there's a lot of things that broke your way in terms of sort of the environment, the target market you were going after with the specific tools. Engineers building tools for engineers, that's super ready for build a better mousetrap, the world will be a path to your sort of execution of philosophy. Can you give some other examples of what you described working in other companies or in other markets and situations?
Sure. So the question is skeptical. It feels like it's a specific market, a specific time, a specific place. So there are other companies that are attempting to execute this model and have done it very successfully. The most obvious one is Slack, right? So basically Slack is an enterprise collaboration tool. They don't have a sales force, right? And they literally basically executing the exact same playbook that I'm describing. Twilio, yeah, but it's developer market to some degree because it's an API market. Are there other good examples off the top of my head? Intercom, right, up until some point. Zapier, yeah. See, the challenge I have with giving you good counterexamples is exactly what I described, which is that I see a lot of great startups do this, right? So a few of them that come off the top of my head are like Front, right? You know, Airtable, I don't know if you know any of these startups, they're amazing, right? But what I constantly see them do is I see them reach a point where eventually it would seem relevant to them to like goose, like they reach that moment, that dotted line that I talked about, and then they go effectively, we're crushing it right now, we could crush it times 2 over the next year by introducing a Salesforce. And I don't deny that's true, right? So I feel like there's an anti-survivor bias going on, right? Like you are right that there aren't that many examples of it, but that's partly because the companies often develop and change over time. So yes, I don't have that many examples, but I do believe it's authentic. And I know that companies do grow to profitability without a Salesforce, lots of them.
Hi, can you comment on the role of marketing here? When you talk about no sales, how does marketing help the word of mouth, get the vision out? You know, you look at the Atlassian website, it kind of looks different than typical enterprise software sites. A few comments there, please.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so exactly right. Our view of marketing, and so there is a marketing force, like you'd see that sales and marketing is not zero. But yeah, so there is a marketing force, and it is all about effectively enabling that. Once I've first heard about these products, right, how do I arrive and learn that this thing has any value to me and get enough trust that this thing is going to work, and then kind of begin that process. So marketing viewed itself as somewhat awareness, but also a lot about making that process of convincing and giving all the materials and you know, evidence necessary to support the decision. So we did have a marketing force. It wasn't particularly large. It certainly wasn't as large as a number of different companies. And we did not spend like anywhere near as much money on like, as a lot of companies that size would do on paid acquisition or brand marketing or, you know, pay-per-click or any of that type of thing, right? Because again, over 80% of all incoming sales were word of mouth, organic. Which is a pretty great business, but you still do need marketing. You still do need the ability to communicate your brand value. You still need the ability to communicate product value.
Okay, we have one here.
Yeah, my question was, when you have a model like this, how exactly do you think about scaling the support function?
The support function, did you scrap? Yeah. Sorry, so the question was, when you have a model like this, how do you scale the support function? And the answer is, we scaled it. So the support function at Atlassian was, you know, reasonably large, right? There were you know, triple-digit numbers of people involved in the business that were specifically on support. We're actually kind of fanatical about support. So effectively, we did scale the support function in line with the total incoming call volume. But again, we also funded teams whose job it was to identify the top 10 different support reasons and kill them, right? With the idea that, you know, we can't just keep scaling support to plug holes. So I mean, the answer is yes. Actually, we did a lot of support, and we did have fanatical support, and we had, you know, very available support and a significant support staff, still attempting to execute the model where we attempted to reduce the amount of touch as much as possible.
I think to your point too, when you talk about scaling, you go back to Atlassian in the beginning, right? They're doing it with a credit card, right? So if you have a situation where you can do it like that, then you're in control of it yourself, right? You're controlling the scale, you're controlling everything. For a lot of companies, right, you get VC funding, now they're putting unnatural pressure on the company to scale. So that's when it gets a lot. So anybody who has the right thinking about developing software, that has now put pressure on by VCs to scale. Now you do very unnatural things, in my view, in my experience, right? That causes some of that little bit of a train wreck along the way.
Yeah, so the question was, just to summarize for anybody who's watching, the question statement was kind of around the fact that VC money tends to incentivize rapid scaling, and as a result, like, you have to do this stuff because you want to goose the revenue. And I think that's true, absolutely that's true. And so Mike and Scott didn't have that because there was no possibility of VC money. I think, you know, one of the you know, most biting things that someone can say to somebody here in the Bay is it's a hobby business, right? And I was actually talking about it with somebody earlier, right? It's like X is a hobby business. And I'm like, what do people mean by that? Was integrated research a hobby business? You could say it was, right? $44 million a year, not that big. Is it VC money worthy? Probably not, right? So it's a hobby business, right? And I think that's, a really trivial way to kind of, attack somebody. And so there were times when Atlassian was a hobby business, right? They did not take outside funding. They only took outside funding very late in the day from Excel, primarily in order to get somebody on the board that would help them meet more important, other valuable people in the valley. So they did take VC money, but never actually to operate the business. And so you're right? So maybe something that Mike and Scott deserve a lot of credit for is being willing to run a hobby business, right? And being willing to weather that process in order to come out the other side of it a really strong organic business. I agree.
Hello. All right, so I really enjoyed your point about, you want to make a product that, people don't only buy, but also, or try and then enjoy and then, continue to be satisfied with and then renew and then recommend to their friends, right? And I guess you mentioned that your growth team was not focused on hacking, but was focused on the full cycle. So I'm wondering, organizationally, how do you guys achieve that? Because I think in, for example, in my company, we have different product teams, and there's no focus on the full cycle necessarily, because different people own each part. So how do you guys address that?
Okay, so the question is, it's exciting to think about growth throughout the whole cycle, exciting to think about friction across the cycle and making customers really happy, but how do we execute that? And so the answer was that, the answer for Atlassian was that the growth team was central, and we literally we're central. Like we could do growth work in any product, in any point. And so we kind of, we viewed the whole world as open, right? In terms of, we thought about the whole world as a funnel. I still think about the whole world as a funnel. Kind of every single flow in a product is a funnel, right? Like there are funnels everywhere you look. And we basically would constantly be looking across the funnel, like in terms of acquisition, activation, retention. And we were constantly looking across it going, where in all of our major products do the problems lie, right? And we're just ideating and ideating and ideating. And so the answer is we set the whole world as our options. Then we went wide, and then we went deep. So basically, we went wide to try and find the opportunities. We went, that's broken, that's broken, that's broken, that's broken. Then we went deep to try and nail each opportunity that we identified along the way. Easier said than done, because you end up, operating inside other people's products, which can be hard, politically and technically and engineering-wise. So it's got its upsides and its downsides, but that's how we tackled it. We also built technology specifically for teams. So we built a tool called the engagement engine, which allowed individual teams to detect when something had happened and automatically cause new things to happen. So the idea was that you could add a new rule that said, if somebody clicked here and failed to do X, then show this that says this, right? So you could use it to work out, if people died here, I would show them this thing, they would find that thing again, and then it would measure the success, and then you go, okay, now we need to fix that, right? So basically we set up tooling to allow people to kind of prompt and nudge and help along all sorts of experiences, with the idea of then drilling deeper on that. Thank you.
Can you maybe explain, or I'm kind of curious, how does Atlassian drop the ball on HipChat? Because I find that HipChat is such a great, piece of software, a great tool, especially for startups, and you guys have such a great community, such great support system, and people who love the tool so much. So what happened on HipChat? Because I feel like our startup was actually forced to move from HipChat to Slack because we just couldn't get the support we needed from Atlassian on that. And something happened, and could maybe talk a little more about what might have happened?
Yeah, what might have happened? So the question is about HipChat, what happened with HipChat? I mean, I can only share my observations, and it would be that, we have a lot of products in the portfolio, right? And HipChat was very valuable and very important, and we were developing it. But we were also developing Bitbucket and Jira and Confluence and everything else. And, it just kind of got away a little bit from us, right? I don't think it was deliberate. It just, we didn't invest hard enough at the right time in the right place in order to kind of, be able to push the ball forward. And by the time we realized it, You know, we had a bunch of scaling challenges, a bunch of technology challenges, you know, competitive challenges, right? Like, it's just, it was. I don't think there was necessarily a strategic failure. It was more of a timing and you know, focus failure. And you know, we felt it internally, by the way, right? So we used HipChat for like many years, right? And we understood the problems with scaling and the bugs and the issues that were occurring. And we had like, I mean, we really went hard after this problem. Once we realized what had happened, like we threw, you know, many resources at the problem. And the thing is, once it's gone too far, that doesn't work. Like, you can't just magically pull it back. You can't just magically fix everything by throwing a whole bunch of resources at it. And so yeah, it took time, right? And so in the end, we ended up shipping Stride. Stride was baking internally for a very long time, right? I still think it's actually a really sweet piece of software, but I agree that like there was a missed opportunity there. It was just a difficult one.
Yeah, just from my personal experiences, not just only my startup, but also a lot of my friends' startups, they're all using HipChat, and we love it so much. And it was just kind of sad to see that us had to like abandon HipChat and go to Slack. And that gap kind of gave, I guess, like an opportunity to come in. But yeah, like all my friends on every startup that I talked to at that time were all using HipChat, and they loved it. Absolutely loved the software, the tool. And yeah, it's kind of sad to see it go.
Yeah, that hurts a bit. It does. It hurts, right? You know, like I agree. I totally agree, right? And so yeah, I think there were just challenges there. There were problems there.
So Shaun, we're out of time, so we'll take one last question.
Okay.
And we'll leave it open for.
Sure.
So you had a very cool equation over there, success equal to drive minus friction, and some of the examples you talked about friction or desire minus friction. So can you give some examples around how do you create desire? And when you create desire, there are different personas that use your product, right?
Yep.
There are admins, they're like software developers, very different than a project manager or a product manager.
Yep.
So if you could elaborate on how you went about creating desire.
Sure. So the question is, how do you go about creating desire? And the equation is desire minus friction. This is a topic very near and dear to my heart. We could talk about it for an hour. So you're right, desire comes before friction. Desire is the most important piece. And you don't get desire by building features, right? That's not desire, right? Desire is the belief inside a person, an identifiable person, that X thing could help them actualize their life in some way. They have to be able to go in their brain and go, wow, my life could be so much better. I could be sitting on a beach in Tahiti if only X were true. These guys can get me to that, so I therefore want to do that, right? And so, like, when I say it's near and dear to my heart, what I notice happens a lot of the time is that fundamentally marketing is actually really good at this, right? Marketing's job is to connect the value delivered by the software to the dreams of the people that have those needs, right? And so marketing tends to do a great job there. And what I notice is that at a lot of businesses, marketing does all this really great stuff, right? There are great screenshots, there are great demos, there are great videos, there's great everything. Then you click the try button, and suddenly you're just dumped in this piece of software, and you're like, what happened to Tahiti? Like, what like, it's like this really weird experience. It's discombobulating, right? Because what the marketing side usually tells me, in my language, what my problem is. It tells me that this is your problem, this is the solution, we can help, do it, right? So I've actually got some amount of belief when I click the try button, but I've also got a bit of belief that like you're probably lying to me, right? Because it's your job to tell me you're going to give me something, but I don't believe you, right? So I've got some desire, but not that much, right? So the very moment when I start is the moment you need to reinforce my desire. You need to give me what I'm looking for as soon as humanly possible, like seconds, basically. You probably only got 30 seconds to show me what I care about. Then when I click that button, you want to do it again. It's like you want to constantly be reinforcing that what you said to me is true. And so like, if you look at that original like Confluence one I showed you, that's from years ago, so it's not the best modern stuff, right? But that was exactly that, right? We'd shown people these spaces. We told them they could organize all their work. It would make perfect sense. Then they got dumped in Confluence. So that screen is designed to go, oh, so they said this is how it would work. This is why it would change my life. Here is how I begin the first step along that journey, right? And then you just constantly got to reinforce it. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but like, it is about the personas. It is about their needs. You know, at times you show them pictures of themselves. You use social proof. You use different ways of explaining to them, I promise you, after this button click, on the other side of this, I will make your dreams come true.
No, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thanks so much, Shaun.